guys, it's Libby, and today I'm doing a bit of a rare thing on this channel nowadays, and that is a good old-fashioned book review. I'm going to be reviewing two books because they go together. This is not happy coincidence. This is because I read one and then it made me think of the other, and so I read that. The first one was The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg, and the second, which was a reread, is The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. These books are related because they are both about soteriology, which is the study of the mechanics of salvation. The first one is about how salvation definitely doesn't work, and the second one is about how the opposite of salvation works. Confessions of a Justified Sinner is a Scottish novel which was published in 1824, which is unfortunately just a few years after the death of Jane Austen, because I think Jane Austen would have been really interested in this book. She might have even liked it, even though it is a Gothic novel, which she rather looked down upon, as fans of Northanger Abbey will know. I almost said fans of Downton Abbey, but I suspect there's a significant overlap. But I think she would like it because Confessions of a Justified Sinner is a Gothic novel with like an intellectual spin, and I think, you know, she objected to the fact that Gothic novels are just a bunch of silly fluff that gives you unrealistic impressions of the world, whereas this one is specifically a criticism of Calvinism and predestination. So slightly unconventionally for a Gothic novel, it's set in Scotland. The classical Gothic setting is typically like France or Italy, some sort of Catholic country with like old creepy castles. But Hogg definitely captures a sense of the Gothic in the Scottish landscape. Part of it is set in Edinburgh and part of it is set like in the countryside. I don't remember if we get a clear distinction of whether it's highlands or lowlands, but you know, you can definitely imagine the sort of barren cragginess of Scotland, and also there is a sort of like dark, intense religious aspect, but in this case it's Calvinistic and not Catholic. And the setup of the narrative rather reminded me of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, which I'm about to spoil, but it's okay because society has already spoiled it for you. I think a lot of people have a misconception of like what the experience of reading that novella is actually like. So it's 6 chapters, and the first 5 chapters are actually from the perspective of a Mr. John Utterson, who is basically telling us, I have this friend, Dr. Henry Jekyll, and he's been behaving strangely lately. And then it's not until chapter 6 that you get Dr. Jekyll's account of like how he made this potion, and he actually is Mr. Hyde, shocker. And this had kind of a similar setup, although the chunking was slightly different. So the first quarter to a third is a pretty straight narrative where some strange things happen, like murder, and we don't really know why or what's going on, or we think we know who done it, but there are some like impossible or at least highly improbable things associated with it. And it's, I think it's directly narrated by James Hogg, the author. He's unusually present in this text. And then for the second 2/3, we switch to the memoir of the justified sinner. And he is a young man who we know from the first part of the narrative. His parents really didn't get along. It's actually not totally clear whether his father is his father or his father is this Protestant minister, because his mother was a very strict Protestant and his father was quite a lax Protestant. So they had a falling out, and they lived in the same house, but they like had the doors closed and like they had their own entrances, and so they were technically living in the same building, but they were treating it like different houses. And so he ends up being raised by his mother and this minister. And they are very strict Calvinists, which means they believe in predestination, which is the theory that even before the world was created, God knew which souls were destined to go to heaven and which were destined to go to hell. And anyone who is destined to go to heaven, which is a very select few, would, by their nature, perform good works. They would be good people, and everybody else would perform a mix of good and evil, but like probably more evil. And somehow, coincidentally, pretty much everyone who believes in predestination believes that they are one of the elect. So our young man Robert is raised to believe that he is one of the elect, and then meets a friend, he starts to realize that if he's guaranteed to go to heaven, then anything he does on earth doesn't matter because his soul's fate has already been decided. And so anything that he does will be for the good of the church and for the glory of God, even if that is killing someone. I thought that this kind of dragged through the first part of the narrative, the part before we get to the first-person memoir, but I think that's because I was expecting, I knew the basic outline of the plot, and so I was expecting, like, Satan to show up, and it kept not, and I was like, ooh, is that him? Is that him? So just know that if you decide to read it, the first third is meant to be kind of like weird and disorienting, and then you figure out what was going on later. And if you want to read this, I would also have you make note that some of the secondary characters speak in Scots instead of in English. I do not have time right now to get into the debate of whether or not Scots is its own language, but you know, if you think it's the same language as English, if you think it's just a dialect of English, try reading some of those passages and tell me how much you understand. So you can either decide that it's okay if you don't understand some sections of the text. I don't know how easy it would be to find something with a translation, but I will also leave a link to a Scots English dictionary so you can look up some of the stranger words. And James Hogg was Scots, so there's one Scots word that he uses in the text in general, not just in the dialogue sections, and that is anent, which means about. You're welcome. I gave Confessions of a Justified Sinner 4 out of 5 stars for being a surprisingly smart, pulpy Gothic novel. And of course, while reading that, I could not help but be reminded of the Screwtape letters, which I had an audiobook of when I was a kid and like listened to compulsively. It's about 3 hours long, so like you can get through it in one day, no problem. I think the way it came into my hands was in 3rd grade, I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is C.S. Lewis's most famous work, and I did not like it. And I went home and I told my mom about this, and she was like, well, maybe this instead, Screwtape letters. So I started listening at a fairly young age, although it's not, I think it's accessible to the precocious child. And this is an epistolary novel, but we only get the letters going in one direction. We don't get the response from a senior devil named Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood, who is in the human world and is trying to tempt a soul to hell. So as we learn, each human soul is assigned one devil who represents our Father below, and also assigned one angel who represents the enemy. And they don't have control over this person's actions, but they do have some control over the person's thoughts, so they can sort of nudge them in a more charitable direction or in a more selfish direction. And the goal is that when the human dies, they have been more bad than good, and then they can go to hell, where the devils like eat them, in some way consume them, and that is why the satanic horde is wanting to get people down there. So Wormwood, you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, because Wormwood is an improbably bad tempter. He basically needs advice from his Uncle Screwtape about everything, but I think you will find Screwtape's world building to be charming enough that you will not mind. I should also say that I disagree with C.S. Lewis on most points of theology, but that does not prevent me from enjoying this book as pure fantasy, while he thinks I think he thinks in some ways it's fantasy, but the underlying elements are real. I give this book 5 out of 5 stars. It is a very delightful way to spend an afternoon, and I listened to it this time not from that original audiobook I got when I was a kid, but to an audiobook read by John Cleese, which is available on YouTube, which I'm not sure is legal, but It is not my job to know what is under copyright and what is not on YouTube. That is Google's job. So I'm going to leave you a link to the audiobook that I listened to for you to do with as you desire. And that is all for now. It has been, as always, a delight, and I'll see you in a new video soon.